Neuroscientist Josi Driessen will discuss what we know about psychopathy, how it is studied, and whether it can be treated. Please welcome, and she's sitting here in front, Josi Driessen. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Gijs, for the nice introduction. Also, thanks to you, the audience, for showing up in such great numbers. That's really nice. So I was invited today to give you a talk about psychopathy. And psychopathy is a term that we often encounter in, for example, TV series or in the popular media. And they tend to give us a somewhat stereotypical image of what a psychopath is, right? Often they are like cold-hearted, remorseless killers, for example. And in this talk today, I would like to provide you a look beyond these stereotypes. So I will talk a bit about how we as researchers, but also clinicians, forensic psychiatrists, characterize psychopathy. Also how we study the underlying mechanisms that drive their behavior. But also I would like to invite you to reflect a little bit on your own behavior and see whether there are some of these traits that you also recognize in yourself, or maybe your neighbor or your colleague. So, psychopathy. So the people in the audience that are into crime series, psychological thrillers, might probably recognize some of these pictures displayed here. This, I hope you can see it, is the cold-blooded serial killer Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. It's already quite an older movie. Here you see Frank Underwood, a very manipulative American politician in the series House of Cards. And then maybe a less familiar, but not less evil, Miss Ratched, a nurse who kills a lot of her patients. And obviously, these are fictive characters, right? But there are also some real-life, real-world examples of persons that actually share quite some characteristics with these fictive characters. And I think to many of you, the name Ted Bundy rings a bell. He's shown here. Ted Bundy is a serial killer in the US. And he killed over, I think, like over 30 white female. And the interesting case here is that, known for his charm and his intelligence, he actually maintained a huge group of female fans that actually, even after he confessed his murder, were really like impressed and admire him. So that's interesting, right? Here we see Jeffrey Dahmer. He regained a lot of attention lately because of the recent Netflix series that came out. And for the Dutch people among the audience, probably they recognize this person. This is Willem Holleder. He is a notorious figure in organized crime in the Netherlands. And he's involved in many serious offenses. But at the same time, he also received a lot of positive attention. So there was a time where he was in and out of prison, and the times that he was out of prison, he drove his Vespa all around Amsterdam, and actually people approached him and wanted to take selfies with him. He even got a stage in a highly rewarded TV show in the Netherlands called College Tour, where he was interviewed, and also students actually could interview him. So very interesting cases, if you ask me. So often we characterize these types of figures as psychopaths. But what actually makes us think they are psychopathic? What do all of these people have in common? So one of the things they all show is very severe antisocial behavior. So each of the examples I just showed you committed at least one, but most of them committed multiple murders. It's good to note, though, that antisocial behavior is not always that violent. So antisocial behavior is a very broad concept. It also includes things like theft, fraud, but also much more minor things like throwing trash on the street, I don't know, any rule-breaking behavior, actually. Then another thing that they have in common is that they lack a sense of empathy. So they have a hard time to feel what another person is feeling. And then also they lack a true sense of guilt. So if they harm another person, they don't really feel sorry for that. They just don't feel that. And then based on these traits I show here, you could think, well, psychopaths, that should be very asocial figures, right? But maybe the most disturbing fact, if you ask me, is that they are actually quite charming. They are quite nice to talk to. They are very talkative, they are interested. So they kind of have a good sense of what are the social rules. But then they also use this in order to manipulate others. And that this person here is a forensic psychologist, Canadian forensic psychologist called Robert Hare. And at some point he decided to organize all these personality characteristics and behaviors in a model of psychopathy. And here he has distinguished 4 different factors. The first factor is the interpersonal factor, which is characterized by things like manipulative behavior, but also pathological lying, a sense of superiority, so someone feels as if he's better than others or more important than others. Then the affective factor is characterized by the lack of empathy, lack of guilt, and also callousness. Then lifestyle refers to behaviors such as a parasitic lifestyle, so people that tend to live on other people's money or live in other people's houses, like your children, for example. No, just kidding. And also like impulsivity and irresponsibility are some of the behaviors that relate to lifestyle factor. And then antisocial behavior. This is characterized by early behavioral problems, juvenile delinquency, and also criminal versatility, so someone who committed a lot of different criminal crimes. And one more thing, so while the interpersonal and affective factors reflect more the personality characteristics that are really specific for psychopathy, the lifestyle and antisocial factors are more associated or more generally antisociality. So in the same person, based on this 4 factor structure, designed the psychopathy checklist revised, which is considered as the golden standard measure for clinicians and forensic psychiatrists to detect people scoring high on psychopathic traits. And this is a combination of a semi-structured interview along with a review of collateral information. And there you can think of, for example, crime records. And then there is this certain cutoff score, and if someone scores above this score, we would say, well, this person is clinically diagnosed as a psychopath. All right, now, what I would like to ask you to provide me some input for the next. And you can see this, whoops, this QR code. If you have a phone, you can scan it. And in a few seconds, a couple of statements will be shown on your phone. And I would like to ask you to indicate to what extent you agree with these statements. So let's see. So I give you a minute to answer these questions. It's completely anonymous. Maybe it's good to say. Okay, so let me first explain why I show you these statements. These are statements that are actually part of a self-report measure of psychopathy that we use to measure psychopathic traits in the general population. And Gijs already hinted at that. Psychopathic traits are also present in the general population. And I will tell more about that in a few minutes, but let us first go over the results. So, the first statement, I have broken into a building or vehicle in order to steal something or vandalize. There are some outliers, but I think most people indicated that they strongly disagree. Well, that's something I expected. This is already quite severe antisocial behavior, I would say, and also like in a homogeneous group like you, I don't expect to see many differences there. There are some, but not too many. Then the second statement, sometimes you have to pretend you like people in order to get something out of them. Here we already see much more variation, right? And this is actually a statement that reflects manipulative behavior. And this is also what I often see, that here there's much more variation within a general population sample like you. Then the third one, I dump friends I don't need anymore. Less variation, a bit more than the first one, which means that probably you are quite an empathic audience. Because you could say that, well, if you dump friends you don't need anymore, it seems like you don't really think about feelings of others, you don't really care about feelings of others. You're very instrumental, just think for your own goals. And then the last one, I enjoy doing wild things. Well, this is more general, I think. There's also quite some variation there. This is one of the items that belongs to the lifestyle factor, and it reflects need for stimulation, which we also find in individuals scoring high on psychopathy. Okay, so bottom line, psychopathic traits are also present in the general population. And for those of you who up to now thought that I was spending my work days in prison, hanging out with brutal murderers all the time, well, that's not the case. Sometimes, yes, but also a lot of my work and also work in the field is based on studies that were done within the general population. And that is because we know psychopathic traits are somewhat normally distributed across the population. So that means that on one hand you have these really low, extremely low scores, and on the other hand you have these extremely high scores, and the extremely high scores, those are the ones that you often find in prison. Not always, because there are a lot of examples of people that were quite successful at hiding, like remaining undetected. So we have low scores and high scores, but there's also a whole range of scores between, and they're also quite different in how these people then express the different psychopathic traits. So it's not the case that there are two clear-cut groups, non-psychopaths and psychopaths. That's what we thought a long time ago, but actually it's more a dimensional construct. And it could be that those people that score just below the very extreme scores, that they actually function very well in society and they actually achieve a lot of success. And in the light of this, it's really interesting to think about one of the classifications, one of the divisions of subtypes of psychopathy that is sometimes posed. So here they make a distinction between unsuccessful and successful psychopaths. And then the unsuccessful psychopaths are the ones that eventually get caught and end up in prison. But then the successful psychopaths, they either they use their traits in order to achieve their goals, but at the same time harming other people. But there are also individuals that do the same, but actually stay within the legal boundaries. You can think of many of the traits associated with psychopathy, the manipulation, the charm, but also lower empathy, that they can sometimes be very beneficial in professions, in law or business, or also in politics, maybe department manager, I don't know. no worries. So what we know is that, psychopathic traits are really distributed along the range. And even those successful psychopaths can still harm other people. And that's why this term is also a bit controversial, and not everyone likes this distinction between unsuccessful and successful psychopaths. But then at the same time, it also emphasizes that that it's really necessary that we do research on psychopathic traits in the general population, because still they can cause a lot of harm to other people. All right, so we as researchers are not only interested in how we characterize psychopathy, how we can recognize them, but also what drives their behavior. One of the things we look at is at their underlying cognitive mechanisms, and how they are impaired. And I would like to give you an example. So from this type of research, we know, for example, that they show a lot of affective impairments, impairments in emotions and how they deal with that. So on one hand, we see that they experience their own emotions differently, and also they are less successful in regulating their own emotions. And then on the other hand, they also show problems, or at least show different processing and also interpretation of emotions in others. And let me give you an example. Mostly we see those problems in, for example, recognizing negative emotions in others. So here you see a fearful face, and in this experiment, they asked people to indicate to what extent a bunch of different facial expressions are fearful or not. And what they found here is that the individuals that score very high on psychopathy are less successful at indicating whether such a face is fearful or not. And then they also looked at the eye movements and where they look at in such pictures. And what they see here is that the people scoring low on psychopathic traits actually look a lot to the eye region, which makes sense, right? Because if you see a fearful face, the eyes provide a lot of information. But then if we look at the heat map of where the individuals scoring high on psychopathy look, we see that they don't focus so much on the eye region. And that could be the reason why they don't recognize such things in the same way. We also think that these things might underlie the lack of empathy. For example, imagine you're interacting with another person, you're either in a discussion or even already in a fight. For most people, if they see someone being scared, or they see fear in their eyes, or they see sadness, then that is like a stop signal for them. So they tend to take a step back, they tend to back off a little bit, because they don't, in the end, they don't really want to hurt someone else. But what we see in individuals high on psychopathy, what we think is that because they don't recognize those negative emotions in others, that they don't see this stop signal and just continue with what they're doing, and they also don't really empathize with them. Well, there are lots of other cognitive impairments that are related with decision making. So one of the things we found is that individuals scoring high on psychopathic traits have a different sense of what is fair and unfair. We also see that they are really extremely reward-driven, and that they also don't really learn from negative feedback or from punishment. And that also explains why their behavioral patterns are so persistent. I would love to go more into that, but I don't have time for that now. We can also take a step further and look at their brains. how do these cognitive and affective impairments relate to certain brain areas? So when looking at brains, we can look at different things. So one of the things we can look at is structural differences. So are the sizes and shapes of certain brain areas different in low versus high scoring individuals? We can also look at functional differences. So is there a difference in how people, how their brains respond to information in the environment? And we can look at connectivity. So how do certain brain areas communicate with each other? And is that different in low scorers versus high scorers? And what we found, what they found in early studies is that at least 3 areas in the brain are very important, are very highly associated with psychopathy. One is the amygdala. You might have heard of it before. It's considered the center of emotion processing, and it's also, for example, involved in threat detection. The second is the prefrontal cortex, also quite familiar, I think, to most of you. Specifically here, ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a subsection of it. And this is associated with things like behavioral control, emotion regulation, and it's also part of a larger circuitry that is involved, for example, in moral decision-making. And then we have the striatum, which is more specifically involved in processing of punishment and rewards. And in all of these 3 areas, we see differences in like shape and size, in how they function, and also how these areas communicate with each other. And these are results from earlier studies. This year, there was a really interesting study that came out in which researchers actually integrated all of the findings of the last couple of decades concerning psychopathy and the brain. And what they found is that psychopathy is actually related to a very complex network of areas. So not only the 3 that I just mentioned, but there are a lot of other factors at play. And this also tempered our expectation that at one point, we can put people in a scanner, look at their brains, and then kind of predict whether they would be able to kill or not. So, no, it's a very complex network. So we can trace back psychopathy to the brain. Does that also mean that psychopathy is purely genetic, purely biological? Well, there are people that think of that, but I and many others with me believe that the environment also plays a very important role. And there's this recent paper of colleagues in the field that posed this idea of the embedded brain. And it actually means that our brain is actually able to adapt to our social and physical environment, and especially during development, during early years, the brain is very flexible, and a lot of things can influence how the brain develops. So it can be like peers, but also family, culture, school surroundings, and they have another bit complex figure, and it's hard to read, but it's not that important. It's just showing that in different stages of development, especially in early life, even before birth, there are factors that affect the neural and cognitive systems that, if impaired, can lead to antisocial behavior in later life. Then what about treatment? Well, bottom line, there is no cure at the moment. There's no cure of psychopathy, unfortunately. Also, it seems that they are really difficult to treat. And 2 of the things which I already briefly touched upon are a reason for that. So one is they are very highly reward-driven. So they have a goal. It could be either money, status, power, but it's really hard to stop them. And they are also very insensitive to punishment. So you can give them a fine, you can put them in jail, but they don't really seem to learn from that. So once out, once cleared, they keep doing the same things, and that makes it really hard. So that's why most of the treatment that is now commonly given is focused on managing and reducing the problematic behavior, such as, for example, aggression. And psychologists and psychiatrists sometimes use then cognitive behavioral therapy. And then a newer avenue is the use of brain stimulation. Maybe you've heard about it before. So it seems to be possible to target specific areas in the brain, and if we stimulate them, it leads to less aggressive behaviors. That's really cool, but there are also a lot of issues, practical issues, because okay, maybe we know how to decrease their aggressive behavior, but what should we do with that? Does that mean that we can only let people out of prison if they promise that they go to the clinic every week to get this stimulation? I don't know, it's really unclear yet. It's really in stage of development. Also, there's not a lot known about potential long-term effects. So it's promising, but it's way too early to say if it's really helpful or not. And then one more thing that you often hear is that it's really important to, especially because there's so much individual variation already within the construct of psychopathy, that we really need personalized treatment. So we need to be able to make like a picture for each and every single individual to better treat this person. And this is why we need a lot of research to understand more and more what drives their behaviors and what happens in the brain. So this. Briefly, some take-home messages. Individuals showing psychopathic traits are not all brutal murderers. Psychopathy is a dimensional construct, so it's not you're not a psychopath or you are a psychopath, but there's actually a range of scores within. Researchers try to understand the underlying mechanisms in order to try to improve also the treatment for these types of persons. The brain is adaptive, so you're not, I would say at least, that you're not born as a psychopath. You can have a risky genetic package, but at least there is a lot of influence from the environment. And then treatment is difficult, but there are some promising avenues. That was it from my side. I'm open for question if time allows it. Thanks a lot.